Chapter 3. It got busy again for the rest of the week, and Nick barely had time to think about the friendly neighborhood gardener. He took his smoke breaks as fast as he could, usually while chatting with Livio, and didn't have a chance to even look across the street and try and wave at Vash. Technically, they were open 24/7, but Nick had a more or less regular schedule that allowed him to go home and sleep. Days could be absurdly long, though, what with coming in early in the mornings to start the day's paperwork, and usually staying late on any given evening that there was a visitation or a small family service. Although the only full-time in-house staff were himself, Brad, Jessica, and Livio, it wasn't like they had to handle every single thing. Besides the body prep contractors, there were also almost always half a dozen church folks underfoot. All Saints was the major Catholic church downtown, and a solid third of CC's clients came through from there. So All Saints had a robust volunteer corps, organized through the church, so Nick didn't have to coordinate it, who would come in and work on setting up flowers, memorials, printing programs, and flyers, ushering during services, and all that sort of stuff. The more Nick learned how and to whom he could delegate tasks, the more he realized that the fundamental core of his job was just talking to the bereaved. He wondered if his mentor back in the coroner's office had known that when he waved the job ad in Nick's face months ago. He wondered if that meant his mentor had been subtly trying to push him out of the morgue and back in front of people. Nick had had several people throughout mortuary school tell him he was way better suited to the front-of-house stuff, to talking to people, that he was such a natural, so charming and calming, and why did he want to hide away in a prep room anyway? Slumped over his desk, Nick sighed and rubbed his eyes. Well, they couldn't know why he wanted to hide if he didn't tell them, and he certainly hadn't done that. It was a miracle he'd managed to make a clean break from his previous career path and even gotten a neutrally worded letter of recommendation out of his old supervisor. He hadn't wanted to waste that by just blabbing about his fatal flaws to anyone and everyone. December City's social services department could certainly have explained to all the folks in mortuary school why Nick Wolfwood was not suited to talk to the general public. Better for everyone if they didn't. There was a knock on Nick's office door. He stood up hurriedly, straightening his suit jacket and brushing to make sure he didn't have any visible crumbs. All he'd managed to eat today was half a pack of peanut butter crackers. "Come in," he said. "Sorry, I didn't realize I had an appointment." The door opened, and there stood Vash Sovram, all 6-foot-something lanky mess of him. His shirt was orange and brown plaid today, very autumnal, even though outside was the depth of the dog days of summer. He had one hand shyly tucked in a pocket, the other up in a little wave. Said Nick. "Hi, sorry, you busy? Jessica up front said it was fine to come back, but I don't want to interrupt." "No, it's fine, I'm not doing anything right this minute." Nick stuck his hands in his pockets. "What brings you across the street?" Vash laughed and scratched the back of his neck. "Kinda stupid, I guess," he said. "But it felt silly to call when I'm just right there. You said you might come back on a lunch break, but I realized you're super busy and might not actually have that much of a lunch break, so if you did want to check out the rest of the neighborhood, you might need to do it after hours?" "Oh, said Nick. "We're technically open all the time, so there's no after." "Oh," said Vash, looking a little disappointed. Nick blinked. "But, I do. I get off work at 5. Technically. Usually not actually at 5. More like 10 a lot of the time." "Damn," said Vash, brow dipping inward. "I thought I worked long hours." Nick shrugged. "Still kind of getting used to it. I could leave it to the other people, but I'm still so new, so I feel like I need to be around for everything." Vash's brow cleared. He looked sympathetic. "Well, don't overdo it," he said. "You gotta have time for yourself, right?" Nick shrugged again, uncomfortably this time. I don't really have anything else to do, so it's fine." Vash paused a beat too long, clearly digesting this information. "No, anyone else waiting for you?" He grinned, sudden and disarming. "Like a cat? There's a stray in my neighborhood who's basically adopted me against my will. Honestly, Kuroneko yowling for food outside my window is the main reason I get up in the morning. And she keeps me going home on time because you wouldn't believe how scratchy she can get when dinner's late." Nick laughed, grateful for the offered deflection. "Nah, no pets, no people. Just me and Angelina." One of Vash's eyebrows went up, and Nick said, "My motorcycle. I guess taking care of her is my only hobby." "Oh, nice," Vash said, eyes wide. "Is she that black Kawasaki that's always on the side street?" "Yep," Nick said, trying not to preen too much. "Oh my god, that thing is gorgeous," Vash gushed. "I hadn't even made the connection that it showed up the same time as you. Dang." He says dang, Nick thought deliriously. Who says dang? And why is it so cute? "Sorry," said Vash, looking down sheepishly. "I'm really taking up your time, sorry. I guess the main reason I came over here was this." He took a few more steps into the office, pulling something out of his shirt pocket. He handed it to Nick. It was a business card. "Number on the back is my personal cell," said Vash, who was close enough for Nick to get a really good look at his green eyes. Less green than teal, Nick thought, distracted. Kind of a sea color. "Shit. Phone number? Personal? What?" "If you wanted to meet up after work," Vash said. "For that walk." "Oh," said Nick. "Yeah, right. I'll definitely call." He was suddenly self-conscious of his breath, because Vash was surely close enough to smell it. Did nicotine and peanut butter smell terrible together? Should he keep mints on his person at all times? Yes, the answer was yes. He was going to do that forever now. "I should get you mine so you know I'm not a telemarketer." Vash stepped back and shrugged, a dopey little grin on his face. "I always answer. It's okay. Kite tells me I should screen calls because their robots are so bad these days, but I don't mind them. And you never know who it might be, right?" Yeah." Nick did not ever answer his cell phone unless he had the number as a contact. He itched to get Vash's number in as soon as possible so he wouldn't ghost the man by accident. "Okay, I'm headed back across the street." Vash moved to the door, hand raised to wave Nick goodbye. "Don't feel like there's any pressure or whatever," he added. "No hard feelings if I don't hear from you." "No, I'll probably call. Soon. When I can." Nick felt so stupid. "Okay, looking forward to it. Have a nice afternoon." And then Vash was gone, taking some of the sunshine out of the room with him. Half an hour later, Livio caught Nick smoking in the carport and cornered him. "What was up with Garden Guy?" he demanded. "Huh? Nothing. Came over to give me his phone number." Livio's eyebrows both shot up. "Not like that," Nick snapped, hiding behind a cigarette. "Just being neighborly." "Never was neighborly like that before, I'm pretty sure," Livio said, one eyebrow still higher than the other. "Well, turning over new leaves. It's fine, it's nothing." Livio leaned on the van hood and waved a hand. Fine, not gonna stick my nose in it." He paused. "But he's hot, right? Or is that just me?" Nick choked on smoke and thumped his chest, coughing. "I told you I'd go both ways, right? I'm not sure I remember telling you." "Yeah." Nick wheezed. He coughed again. "I mean, same, but if you... What are you even talking about, man?" Livio rolled his eyes. "Talking about the big dumb grin on Garden Boy's face when he walked out of your office after coming all the way over here to flirt with you, you idiot." Nick took another drag. "I'm not going to assume about anyone else," he objected. "That's why God made fucking asking, with words." Nick huffed. "Would you drop it? There is no flirting. I've had 2 conversations with the man. 2. Livio made a face, but ultimately let it go, changing the topic to the next day's service instead. Still, Nick wrapped his hand around the phone in his pocket, where Vash S. was already listed. He did not call that week, or that weekend. On the Friday of the following week, it was Brad, of all people, who stopped him in the kitchen at lunchtime. "You should go home tonight," Brad said, and crossed his arms. Nick blinked. "Excuse me?" "Leave," said Brad. "At 4. Go home." "But," Nick said, "the viewing's until—" "Yeah, leave at 4 before it starts. Sit it out." Nick was starting to get frustrated. He crossed his arms right back. "Do you have a problem you need to air out, Brad? Should we talk outside?" "No," Brad said, looking even grumpier. "You're just always here. Always. It's not good for you. There are a ton of volunteers coming in, and Ravi has keys for after dark. No one needs you here tonight." There was a soft squeak in the doorway, and both men turned to see Jessica standing there, looking at Brad with narrowed eyes. "You can't say it like that, Brad," she chided, stepping into the room. "Come on, we talked about this." Brad rubbed his forehead and let out a breath. "Right, sorry, I didn't mean it to sound rude." Nick kept his arms crossed and turned to Jessica. "You in on this too?" "Well," she said, "yes. We were talking earlier about how we're a little worried about how hard you're pushing yourself." "Pushing?" Nick shook his head. "It's not like the work is manual labor or anything." Jessica actually stomped her small foot. Nick blinked. "That's not the point," she said. "Labor is labor. Work is work. You need to spend some time somewhere else. Do other stuff. Brad and I both get plenty of time off, and you're always in here, even on weekends. We're open all the—" Jessica cut in. "Being a service that's available 24/7 doesn't mean that each individual has to be available all the time, Mr. Wolfwood," she said. "You're a really good director so far. I think you're doing amazing, okay? But Mr. Chappell was way more hands-off than you are, and it never caused any problems. You've got to take breaks, take weekends, go home sometimes. Let the machine run. Lots of people keep it running. Nick looked between Jessica, brimming with sincerity, and Brad, who was glowering, but apparently in a caring way. He uncrossed his arms and threw them up. Okay, I'm not going to try to fight with you two. Which was how he ended up packing his satchel much too early in the afternoon, at a loss for any more tasks to get done, and expressly forbidden from getting involved in tonight's service. Every time he stepped out into the hallway and asked who he could help, at least 3 church ladies would smile and wave him away with cheerful, "It's okay, we don't need anythings." The last time he did it, Jessica leaned around the corner and glared at him, and he hurriedly retreated to his office. He sat down in his plush office chair and spun gently, looking at the room. The sun was high in the window. He got up again, restless, and pulled back the curtain. The garden center's parking lot was mostly empty, only 3 or 4 cars that didn't belong to staff. Nick had seen Kite on the bike a couple of times by now. He still didn't know who owned the little silver Toyota. Probably Vash's invisible twin, whom Nick had not seen since that one day in the flower shop. He spotted Vash himself coming out into the fenced area alone. It looked like he was searching for something, or maybe just cleaning up things that had gotten out of place over the course of the day. Nick pulled his phone out of his pocket and fiddled with it. Before he could overthink himself, he went to his contacts and scrolled to the bottom, tapped the screen, and held the phone to his ear. Across the street, the little blonde figure kept puttering around for a couple of rings before pulling his phone out of his back pocket and looking at it. One more ring, and then Nick saw him raise the phone to his face. "Hello?" said the slightly distorted voice in his ear. Nick froze up for a heartbeat. He let the curtain drop because watching and talking at the same time was both too creepy and too distracting. He cleared his throat. Hey," he said. "This is Nick Wolfwood from across the street." "Oh, hi!" Vash's voice went up about an octave. Nick crossed his arms protectively, phone pressed tight to his cheek. "I was starting to think you weren't going to call. Glad you did." Nick tried to laugh normally. "Yeah, it's been busy." He swallowed. "I've been ordered to take a break by the staff over here, and they're right. I'm probably at it too much. So, I'm leaving the office in about 20 minutes, if you wanted to walk. But that's really short notice, sorry. I shouldn't bother you." No, that sounds great. It's been slow over here all afternoon. Kite and Liz can handle the end of the day. You want to get an early dinner or something?" Dinner. Dinner was not a walk around a block or two. Nick's brain started filling up with Livio's voice, taunting, "Flirt, flirt, flirt." "I wouldn't say no," Nick found himself saying, out loud, with his real drawl. He wanted to slap himself. "Where do you like?" "Well, it's kind of part of the neighborhood tour thing, I was thinking," Vash said cheerfully, and Nick winced. Vash didn't sound flirty. Nick just went in way too hard. Pull it back, man, pull it back. "There's a diner on the corner, catty corner back from me. Lobs. Don't know if you've been." "No, I haven't." "Well, they make like a grilled salmon BLT that is basically my favorite sandwich on the planet. Want to meet over there in a bit?" "Don't say it's a date," Nick told himself firmly. "Sounds good," he said. He spent the next 10 minutes losing his mind. Should he change? Not to get nicer. He was overdressed, if anything. And Vash was perpetually underdressed. So it wouldn't matter, right? He should take the suit jacket off, probably. No, the black saved him from the visibility of sweat. He ate 3 mints in a row, crunching through them aggressively, spinning in his office chair and resisting the urge to smoke with all his might. By the time he left, still too early, but he couldn't just sit around any longer, he had managed to get himself outwardly under control. No one needed to know the acrobatics his guts were trying to do. Nope, okay, can I speak English? No one needed to know the acrobatics his guts were trying to do. He said a hurried goodbye to Jess and Brad. Livio was out on a pickup, and walked outside, satchel over his shoulder, 4th mint tucked in his cheek. He kept worrying at it as he took the sidewalks and crosswalks properly for once. He walked past the fenced area and brick building of the garden center, around the side of the block covered with a translucent white, sci-fi-looking greenhouse structure, and peered around, trying to spot a diner where Vash had suggested it would be. He checked the wrong corner first. Just when he was about to give up and call Vash's number again, he spotted the lanky blonde waving at him from a block away. Vash met him halfway, pink high in his cheeks. "Hey, sorry, I give terrible directions." "No problem," said Nick. "These blocks are small." "Right? I like this area. It's so walkable." They fell in beside each other to walk towards the diner. Nick said, "You drive to work, though, right? That antique car is yours?" Vash laughed too loud, head thrown back. "Antique is the nicest thing anyone's ever said about it," he said. "So the thing is, I don't usually drive. Knives does. My brother, I'm a terrible driver. I mean, I've got my license, but the poor lady giving the test almost didn't want to give it to me, and I don't blame her. They'd reached a glass door. Vash pushed it open and held it for Nick to walk in past him. The unconscious chivalry made Nick blink, but he didn't comment on it. I think I met your brother, he said. Kind of. In passing. Oh? Vash's eyebrow went up. Weird. At Red Roses. I thought it was you for a second. Oh, Vash nodded. That makes more sense. He and Elendira get along. He waved at a passing server, who called out, Hi, Vash. Corner table's open if you want it. Thanks, Monica. Vash led Nick past several chatting diners to a 2-person table tucked in at the end of a bank of floor-to-ceiling windows. They were just out of the edge of the glare from the setting sun. Vash folded into one chair with a pleased sigh, knees almost touching the bottom of the table. Nick was pretty tall, but Vash had a couple inches on him, and he also gave the impression of having more joints than was normal. So, you settling in okay? Vash asked. Monica came back with menus, preventing Nick from answering. Vash, who had had his left hand in his pocket all this time, took it out and leaned over the table on his left elbow. His hand was still hidden behind his right elbow, though. I probably don't need to bring you one anymore, huh? Monica said to Vash, poised with her pen over a notepad. What to drink? Vash looked up with a mischievous grin. What'd you guess? She dutifully wrote something down, saying, Diabetes in a cup, right. She turned her eyes to Nick. Friend of Vash's? Just met, really, said Nick. But at the same moment, Vash said, Yeah. Vash looked at him. New friends are still friends, he said defensively. Nick smiled and gave a yeah, why not shrug. Coffee? He said to Monica. She made a note. Okay. I already know what Vash wants, but give you a minute? Yeah, thanks. Okay. She smiled and walked off. Nick looked down at the menu. Typical diner stuff. Breakfast all day, which didn't sound half bad, but then he spotted the description of the house cheeseburger and his stomach growled. Quietly enough that no one else heard, thankfully. Is the burger good? He asked. I don't know, actually, said Vash. I'm kind of pescatarian. I'm not real strict about it, but I haven't had red meat in years. Oh. Nick looked down again. You gonna be offended if I order it? Vash's eyes went wide. Oh, no way. Go for it. God, I'm used to being the one getting the lecture. I'm never going to tell anybody else how to eat. Lecture? Nick asked. My brother's kind of a militant vegan. Vash huffed a sigh. We've just agreed to disagree on a lot of stuff. Big animal welfare guy? Nick asked cautiously. Vash snorted. Not really. Land welfare, actually. He hates animal farming because of the harm it does to the ecosystem, not because it hurts animals. Vash rubbed the corner of his eye, shaking his head. He's a lot less crazy about it now than he used to be, though. Like, he just at me when I order fish instead of storming out. Wow, said Nick. Sounds like a fun guy. No offense. Vash laughed and clearly did not take it hard. Monica came back with a chipped coffee mug and about a half a gallon of soda and scribbled down both their orders. Before she left, Vash said, By the way, Monica, this is the new guy at Conrad Chapel, Nick. I was just going to take him around and introduce him to folks. Oh! She pocketed her notebook and held out a hand, which Nick shook. I wasn't going to ask about the whole funeral look, but... She gestured vaguely at his suit. Makes sense, I guess. They say dress for the job you want, so I dressed like an undertaker, Nick said, dry as the desert, and it made both Monica and Vash giggle. Once she'd left again, Nick settled in with his hands around his coffee mug. Hot, and smelled fresh. They must have had to make a new pot for him, not too much call for coffee at this time of day. So, he said, the whole neighborhood seems pretty friendly with each other. Oh, yeah. Vash took a big gulp of cola. No straw, he just tipped the plastic cup, which made the working of his long throat very visible. Nick occupied himself with blowing steam off his coffee and tried really hard not to watch his Adam's apple bob. There's a whole little pocket of independently owned places right around here, Vash said. It doesn't get the most traffic, but the whole stretch of the main highway's been taken over by big chain stores. So we don't even try to compete with corporate prices. I mean, Knives and I don't. And we just hope enough locals stay loyal enough to keep the neighborhood in the black. But I don't think we're in any danger right now. There's a big comeback happening for walkable neighborhoods and eco-friendly urban living, you know? Sure, said Nick, who did not know. I guess I'm not a business owner at heart, he added. Bill Conrad still owns the funeral home. He just pays the staff. Yeah, didn't he move to July? Vash asked, swallowing more cola. He has a vacation home there, Nick said, which really said all that needed to be said about Conrad's money situation. Vash quirked an understanding eyebrow. They settled into mundane conversation after that. It was easy to catch Vash up on the inner workings of the funeral home, the lives of the bare handful of people Nick knew but Vash didn't, and then most of dinner was spent with Vash explaining the ins and outs of the folks he knew and Nick didn't. There were a lot more of those. The food came out quickly. The burger was just okay, but the fries were amazing. Vash's salmon lettuce tomato did, admittedly, look very tasty. The bread was thick, grilled sourdough that looked bakery fancy. Around mouthfuls of sandwich, Vash said, "So, Lob moved here from the coast, which is why he keeps so much seafood on the menu, right? Except he was going to cut down on it because supply prices got crazy, but I begged him because this place is one of my go-tos, because they have so many options I can eat, and even Knives will eat here because they know him, and they make a lot of stuff vegan just for him. So anyway, I helped Lob find a different supplier, and that's why there's clam strips on the menu now." Vash grinned. He had a smear of tartar sauce on his face. Nick gestured silently at his own face, and Vash got the hint, picked up a napkin with his free hand to scrub his mouth. For the first time, Nick noticed that he was wearing one brown glove, left hand only. It looked thin, clearly not a work glove. Nick nodded at it and said, "You get cold?" "What?" Vash looked down. "Oh, right. I forgot that's there. He hesitated, only for a fraction of a moment, but Nick caught it. "Circulation problems," he said shortly. "Didn't mean to pry," Nick said, watching Vash's face. The smile came back full voltage. "Oh, no big deal. Ask away." But Nick was almost certain that Vash had lied just now. About what, he wasn't sure, and he could read the room well enough to know when to change the subject. "So, who do you think I need to meet around here?" The short answer was 12 people long. The long answer was 4 times that. They finished up and paid the bill while Vash was still listing people, sometimes pointing at various buildings out the window. "So, Gail's gym is down that way. Regular gym space, and then he does MMA classes 3 nights a week if you're into that. And that little squished-looking store between those other two, that's Treasure Mine. The guy's last name is Mine, is the joke. And it's like antiques and tchotchkes. Whatever he feels like picking up at estate sales out of town, really. That place with the blue awning is a little boutique run by a lady named Dominique. But don't point out that that rhymes or she'll slap you. Or maybe that was just me. I don't know, she doesn't like me much for some reason. People do say I'm too loud." "I think you're fine," Nick reassured him. Vash gave him a thankful grin. They were up and on their way out the door again at that point. Monica called goodbye to Vash, who replied in kind. This time, Nick got to the door first and tried holding it for Vash, just to see what would happen. Vash actually flushed a light pink high in his cheeks and said, "Thanks," on his way out. Inside Nick's head, Livio was still yelling at him to flirt, "You fucking idiot." Nick just hitched his satchel higher on his shoulder and asked, "Where to?" Vash looked around, chewing his bottom lip. "I guess I shouldn't barge in on everyone, huh? Oh, but there's one spot you need to know, hands down. No, wait, 2 spots. He strode off confidently, long legs carrying him faster than Nick expected. He jogged a step to catch up. "Up there," Vash said, pointing and squinting, "is the best bakery in May. Hand to God. Cheryl and her granddaughter Lena, absolute geniuses. But they close at 2 in the afternoon, and if you want the really good donuts, you have to be there at basically the crack of dawn. Which works out great for me, because I usually am. But down this way..." He took a corner that put the bakery quickly out of sight. "It's kind of the hangout spot for the local business owners." He glanced over at Wolfwood. "You're welcome to come around, too. I know you don't own the place, but if there's, issues with city government, ordinances, cops, alderman-type stuff, this is where we end up airing grievances." "Is it a bar?" Nick asked, because he could really use a good one of those for a go-to in this new city. But Vash just laughed. A few shops along, he stopped under a plain-looking brick storefront that was just a samey part of the long brick facade of all the other storefronts. The windows were filled with flyers and posters, and what little space could be seen through were blocked by books. Above the door, in big block lettering, was painted S&T Books, etc. "They wanted to use their first initials, but they thought they might get sued," Vash said, grinning. "Huh?" "Merrill and Millie," Vash said. "You know, M&M's." And he pulled open the door, tinkling a little bell somewhere further in the building. Nick followed him in, over a slightly awkward ramp that had clearly been added to the threshold to make it ADA accessible. These old buildings weren't too reliable for having been built with all people in mind. Inside, the place was cramped and crammed with DIY shelving, a space basically no bigger than a living room absolutely filled to the brim with books. Above them, the second-story floor was missing its center, leaving a rim of railed-in balcony that looked just as full of books. The stairs at the back of the room had a flimsy chain clipped across them, with a sign hanging on it that said Age Restricted, 18+. From somewhere behind a shelf, a high, feminine voice called out, "Hi, can I help?" Then a woman's face stuck out from around the corner, and she spotted the incomers and beamed. "Oh, hi, Mr. Vash!" "Hi, Millie," Vash said, grinning. "What you up to?" "Just trying to arrange the young adult paranormal romances. There's so many." She clunked and thumped around on the other side of the shelf, then stepped out empty-handed, brushing her hands down the front of her shirt. She was Nick's height, had high-waisted jeans, a tucked-in yellow blouse, and a dark blonde ponytail high on the back of her head. Nick instantly thought of both sorority girls and soccer moms. "What you doing here?" Millie asked, striding immediately into Vash's space, arms open. Vash accepted the hug enthusiastically. "Hey," he said. "I guess I haven't been by in a few weeks, huh?" "Yeah, you've made Meryl feel abandoned." Vash let go and stepped back, huffing a laugh. He stuck his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, right. She's probably sleeping like a baby without me around to rile her up. Where is she?" "Upstairs making dinner," Millie said. "It's almost closing time. I was about to lock up anyway. Who's this?" She looked at Nick. Vash gestured between them. "Millie Thompson, Nick Wolfwood, the new Mr. Chapel." "Oh, that's great!" Millie reached out, and Nick was just about to meet her halfway in a handshake before he realized that, oh no, the hug monster was fully committed to tackling him as well. He got his arms up awkwardly just in time to more or less return the quick neck hug from this total stranger. Very, very friendly total stranger. "Hi," Millie said, pulling back. "Mr. Chapel was such a nice man. He really meant a lot to us. You know, he used to come by every now and then to buy books for his grandkids and all his nieces and nephews. One time he bought the entire shipment of a new Percy Jackson book." "You know he's not dead, just retired," said Vash. "Oh, I know," said Millie, flipping a stray strand of hair out of her face. "I hope he comes by here when he can. I could give him so many recommendations." "Well, I'm trying to get Nick kinda in the loop," Vash said. "He hasn't really met anyone nearby." "How long have you been here?" Millie asked, eyes wide. "About 2 months." "Oh yeah, about time then. Mr. Vash, you can show Mr. Wolfwood the back if you want, and you can yell for Meryl. I know she'll want to meet him. Just let me lock up real quick, and I'll come back there." "You sure? You got another half hour till closing." Millie stuck her tongue out. "What's the point of owning my own bookstore if I can't close whenever I feel like it?" Vash patted Nick's arm to indicate to him to follow, and started heading back through the shelf maze. "Meryl might have something to say about that," he called to Millie. "She doesn't own me," Millie called back. As they walked through the shop, Nick craned to look around. He saw labels for a lot of the usual suspects: young adult, poetry, cookbooks, self-help, but also some more niche shelves, like one labeled Existentialist Philosophy and Medical Ethics, or another one, Capitalism Sucks. And there was a mix of shiny new spines and old beaten-up volumes that looked like they'd been rescued from a landfill. He didn't quite know what to make of it, especially not the restricted stairs. "What's up there?" Nick asked, pointing as they passed the chained-off staircase and rounded another shelf into a small back hallway. "Porn," Vash said, without pause. Nick barked a startled laugh. "Seriously?" "Sure. Niche stuff. The insurance girls have some really loyal customers." "The what now?" Vash chuckled. "They used to work in disaster insurance," he said. "Met in the same office. After they just couldn't take working for the evil overlords anymore, they ran off to elope and open a radical feminist erotica bookstore. Love story for the ages, right?" Nick blinked and opened his mouth. Closed it again. "Right," he said. Vash paused in a doorway and turned back, mouth tilted in the vaguest frown. "I guess I shouldn't just take all your politics for granted. Sorry. Just, Mr. Chapel was fine with all this." Nick's eyes widened. He raised his empty hands, fingers wide. "God, no, don't let me give that impression. Happy to fly the rainbow flag wherever. Stones and glass houses and all that." "Okay," Vash said, and paused, considering that statement. Then he grinned. "Cool." He stepped into the next room and gestured around for Nick to come in. "So this is the back." It was a cozy room with 3 sofas awkwardly arranged to barely fit in the space, a large liquor cabinet on the far wall, several side tables, and one massive coffee table in the middle. Books were still piled on many surfaces, but they weren't the primary focus of the room. A bright chandelier hugged close to the ceiling, leaving just enough headroom for the tallest folks like Vash. The floor was burnt orange shag carpet and made the whole room look like a 70s period piece. One end of the coffee table was occupied by several decks of cards and a tin case that purported to hold a full set of chips for Texas Hold'em. At the side of the room was a door to another set of stairs not roped off. Light footsteps thumped down them, and a different female voice said, "I hear way too many people for it to just be you, Mill." A comparatively tiny woman popped out at the bottom of the stairs. She wore a cream sweater dress over dark leggings, no shoes, and her hair was a black bob cut. On seeing Vash, she immediately heaved a huge sigh. "Now what are you doing here?" she demanded. "Hi, Meryl," Vash said cheerfully. "Brought someone to meet you. This is Nick, new director over at CC Funeral Home." Meryl patted over and shook Nick's hand. "So sorry you got kidnapped by the humanoid typhoon here. Or maybe humanoid golden retriever is more like it." "I don't want to keep you two from dinner," said Nick, glancing back towards the front of the store. "It's fine to sit there for a while. It's just chilly," Meryl said, waving her hand dismissively. Vash put on his puppy dog face and said, "Oh, the white bean and green chili one?" She swatted at him. "No, regular ground beef." "Dang it! You can't have any anyway," she huffed at him. "We just ate," Nick tried. "Oh, that doesn't stop him," Meryl said, poking Vash in the chest. "Freeloader!" "What? I'm a growing boy!" "You're like a human garbage disposal for food!" Vash dodged Meryl's continued swatting, laughing all the while. When Millie stepped into the room behind Nick, he looked at her helplessly, not sure if he ought to be intervening. "Aw," said Millie, beaming. "They get on like cats and dogs, don't they?" "So bad?" Nick said. Millie shook her head. No, it's all play wrestling, you know, except the furniture is just as torn up at the end. Hey!" She directed this last yelp at Meryl, whose last smack had missed Vash but come much too close to a lamp. Meryl huffed and crossed her arms. "Okay, that's all you deserve. For now." Vash spun around from his defensive position and flopped onto the nearest sofa. He smiled seductively up at Meryl, stroked his chin, and said, "Is there any chance I deserve a vegan brownie?" "No," Meryl said. At the same moment, Millie clapped and said, "How did you know I baked some earlier?" Because it's the day before the library board meeting and you always take a batch," said Vash. "Oh, right." Meryl said, "They're for the meeting, Millie. Don't give in." Millie dithered. "There's plenty for the board, Meryl. He can have one." "What about Nick?" Vash wheedled. Nick raised his hands. "Hey, I didn't ask for." "And knives. You make the only desserts he'll touch." "Well, sure," said Millie. "I was going to send one home with you for him anyway." "Millie," Meryl groaned. Millie put a finger thoughtfully to her chin. "And if I'm cutting them anyway and the chili can wait, how about dessert before dinner?" "Oh my God," Meryl groused and threw herself onto the sofa next to Vash. "I give up. Might as well bring down the ice cream, too." Vash fist-pumped the air. "Yes!" Which was how Nick found himself unwittingly spending an entire early evening in the back den of a lesbian erotic bookshop, eating vegan brownies with non-vegan ice cream. Apparently Millie only used this recipe because 2 other library board members were vegan, neither herself nor her wife were. And getting to know the absolute heartbeat of downtown May City from 2 ladies who had apparently never met a topic they couldn't gossip about. Where Vash had nothing but positive things to say about any given person, Meryl and Millie offered a far broader spectrum of opinions. Nick couldn't help finding their take on the city and its denizens to be more realistic. He liked them instantly, especially Millie. She gave the immediate impression of being a little slow on the uptake, but he quickly realized that she wasn't slow. She just let almost everything slide right past her, which meant that when she did catch onto something and lobbed it back, it hit with surgical precision. She had Nick's sides aching with laughter in no time. And Meryl, although she didn't hesitate a second to be a loudmouth grouch with a litany of complaints as long as her entire body, clearly could not love her wife more deeply if her life depended on it. It was obvious that she liked Vash, too, despite everything she threw at him. She glanced at him frequently, asked if he needed anything at least 6 times. Nick noticed the attention, even if Vash didn't seem to. When Millie started suggesting whiskey and a hand or 2 of poker, Meryl waved her hands and said, No, not tonight. I can't deal with a drunk wife tonight." "You say I'm a cute drunk," Millie teased. "You are. It's impossible. You are an intolerably cute drunk. I won't tolerate it." Millie beamed at her. "What we need is real dinner and decent sleep," Meryl said, making a shooing motion at Vash. "Come on, get out of my house, you vagabond." Vash stood and stretched with a light groan. "Oh, you love me." "You're a mangy stray that I feed sometimes." "Yeah, you love those." Meryl swatted Vash all the way out the door and down the hall. Nick stood and grabbed his satchel, saying, "Yeah, I should head home too." He looked over at Millie. "Had a hell of a nice time meeting you ladies." "Oh, shucks," Millie said, standing. She wove expertly around the sofas to grab Nick in another hug. It already felt 100 times less weird. He could already tell Millie was the kind of person who you got to know in a heartbeat, felt like you'd known forever, and then never got tired of. She even smelled comforting, like a permanent friend, like book dust and flowers and warm vanilla. Millie stepped back and said, "You gotta come to poker night later then. It's always a good time. Oh, I almost forgot." She darted back to the table and wrapped up a leftover brownie in a paper towel. She handed it to Nick. "For knives," she said. Nick saluted with a little packet. "I'll get it to Vash if your wife hasn't run him into the next county yet." Millie laughed and led Nick back out to the front. Vash was outside on the sidewalk, talking to Meryl. "If you need anything," Meryl was saying. "Thanks, but really I'm fine," Vash said, giving her a dopey grin and rubbing the back of his head. "I promise. I swear. Cross my heart." Meryl just sighed and gave him a quick hug before stepping back. "I better see you again soon," she told him. Then she turned to head back inside and smiled at Nick. "Nice meeting you," she said, hand out. Nick shook it. "Likewise," he said. "I'm damn glad I took Broomhead here up on his neighborhood tour invitation." Vash squawked. "Broomhead?" he said, indignant. "It suits you," Millie called from the door. "Gah!" "Good night," Meryl called, and Millie waved once more, and then the door closed and Nick heard the lock turn. Vash turned to Nick with a wounded look. "Broom!" he said again, dragging fingers through his hair. Nick shrugged and held out the brownie. "Call him how I see him," he said, grinning. "How about Spiky?" Vash huffed, took the brownie, and said, "Okay, fine. Spiky's better." "What, just like that?" Nick said, aghast, as they turned and started heading back toward their own respective businesses. "I thought there'd be more pushback." "Well, what other ideas did you have?" "Needle noggin?" "See, I definitely picked the right nickname to cave on then. I'll allow Spiky." He pondered. "Kinda cool, actually." Nick rolled his eyes. They kept chatting until they reached the stretch of street between their buildings. It wasn't too late, only 7 or so. The visitation was still in full swing, the parking lot of the funeral home mostly full. Nick glanced over and resisted the little urge to go back inside and get back to work. Across the way, the garden center was dark and locked up for the night, but the twins' rusted car was still parked on the curb. "Had a great time tonight," Nick said. "Thanks for talking me into this." "Thanks for calling," Vash said, brightening into his usual grin. "I thought I was overstepping, maybe." "Nah." Nick looked over at the funeral home carport and realized he was way overdue a smoke, but that the craving hadn't hit too hard yet. He started itching for it now, though. "I need to get better at making friends anyway. New city, new job, kind of buried in the work. I just let that stuff slide. So this is good. Great, even." He looked back at Vash to find that the grin had softened and gotten more real was the only thing Nick could think about it. What was different? It reached his eyes, Nick realized. He grinned a lot, but his eyes were always wide, busy, alert to everything around him. This smile had actually pushed his cheeks up, and his eyes were soft and still, fully focused on Nick. God, he was gorgeous. "Friends?" Vash asked, hand out. Nick took it. It felt like making a pact. "Yeah," he said. "Friends." Vash's soft, real smile got even bigger. "I like to hear that," he said. There was a pregnant pause as Nick tried to disentangle himself from the undefinable emotion of the moment. At last, he managed to jerk his thumb over his shoulder and say, "I should head home. Getting late." "Oh," said Vash. "Yeah, for sure. I'll go give this to Knives." He waved the brownie. "See you around?" "Yeah, every day, probably." "Oh, right." Vash laughed, and his smile went back to its usual surface level. "Okay, good night." "Night." Vash walked away. Nick watched him go, passing under the yellow pool of a streetlight, his long legs always carrying him in the same lazy lope. Before Vash could turn back and catch him staring, Nick swiveled and headed for his bike. A man in a pale hoodie was standing on the sidewalk outside the side door of the funeral home, probably waiting for a relative to come out so they could go home. Nick murmured a polite good night to him, head buried in thoughts of friends. The drive home had never felt so long.